real excited to talk to my next guest on the Sports Card Shop at Moco guest line. He is the writer and director of a brand new film, a hobby film nonetheless, that comes out today, literally show release day of this podcast. This film is making its premiere. The name of the film is Behind the Card, but I'm with director, producer, kind of the man behind the movie, Chris Fitzgerald. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, John, for having me here. Big fan of Sports Card Nation.
Well, I appreciate you making some time. I was fortunate enough to get a screening of the film and stayed up, got a little late start on it. I'm a night owl anyway. But first off, well done. At no point, you know, did I want to like stop watching it and go to bed or anything like that. You have that much over the Hunger Games, one of my least favorite movies, which I actually never finished watching. I just didn't like it. So no comparison there. But all joking aside, well done, well put together. I guess my first question to you, Chris, to start off the show is kind of your hobby background, like your own. Do you have one? Like what's your role? I mean, even pre-film, obviously you're one of us now, but prior to the film, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we beat the box office numbers of Hunger Games, since you like ours better. But yeah, I started, so I'm Chris Fitzjarrald, director and writer of Behind the Card. And essentially I did, like a lot of individuals when they were young, collected cards. There was card shows that my dad would take me to. He worked at a card shop for a while. So it was just an integral part of my life growing up. I made a few dumb mistakes when I was young where I sold or traded the neighborhood guys a few of my high-end, back in the day, Michael Jordan cards for Damon Stoudemire and stuff like that. So did my mistakes when I was young, got out of it in high school like a lot of individuals, and then really got back into it in quarantine like a lot of individuals did. Went out to Target with my wife, Paula Fitzgerald, when we essentially moved to Vegas from Los Angeles. And I was like, hey, there's a box of cards. Why don't I get one? It was just in the time zone of like 1920 Prism to 1920 Mosaic, that time frame. So Zion, Jaw, that big era of rookie card chases. And I hit a Zion Prism card when I got home. So looked on eBay, saw those cards were going for a large amount. Went back a week later, there was no boxes on the shelf. So I thought that was kind of strange. I thought, well, did Panini and Topps just, distribution is struggling because it's quarantine. Went back another week and there was like 2 or 3 boxes, Topps Heritage or whatever that, they're just the low end products. And so I went online and started doing some research in the space and saw how kind of epic the rise was, right, between 2017 and 2020. And it really fueled me to start selling on eBay with boxes that I could find and selling singles. And I'm up to about the 6-figure mark in eBay sales. So I'm an integral part of that side of the business as well, not just a collector.
So I got to ask you, but before this film, any experience in the filmmaking document? Like, what is your background prior to this film?
Yeah, I love this question because essentially I've never created a TikTok video before this. I really did not spend time in the content space at all. I actually have a technology background. I own an HR tech business. My wife, Paula, she actually was the first employee of a tech startup that was electric vehicle batteries to compete against Tesla. And that went public in December 2020. She actually saw a need for content during quarantine where individuals just stopped, filming. So essentially because of that and the story I had, from what I saw was going on within the sports card market, she just one night mentioned, this sounds like a movie. And we were like, you know what, this does sound like a movie. So we essentially spent 6 months behind the scene, just kind of taking as much as we could from online, talking to individuals and really understanding the marketplace. And we realized how much of a spider web it was versus a linear path of what you do in this marketplace. So we really felt like we needed to create something that would allow non-collectors to come in and not lose their way right away. So that's essentially why we started to, film this, and it ended up being a documentary on sports cards as our first one.
So credit to your wife Paula. She's the one that
She's the
planted
one.
the seed. So
Exactly.
so when you decided like, hey, let's do this, we're gonna do this. Like, what was the first thing? Like, where did you start? Like, where did it all start with the as far as the
Yeah.
process goes?
So we knew we needed to start a real organization. So we incorporated, and we essentially got the best individuals across the film space. So our legal team to get everything done behind the scenes, because when you create a theatrical film, it's not like you're just throwing up on YouTube, right? Everything has to be signed off on, from just names, products, everything, right? So ensuring that we did that correctly, and then we moved into really understanding what producers do we need. We need cinematographers. We need boom carriers where they actually hold up, the actual booms for voicing over. And once we built the team out, then we started tackling, okay, now that we have a team that, essentially has worked on Jason Bourne, Mall Cop 2, Paul Blart, those movies, the second to last Batman. We got some really good team members that we felt like we could create a real film on. Then Paula, my wife, as she does everything for this film, she was actually the casting director and started, getting individuals that I felt like was necessary to be in our film to make this a success, not just, on a platform, but an actual theatrical release.
Did you get any pushback from anyone? In other words, did anyone, even in a polite sort of way, maybe say, "You want to make a movie about sports cards? Are you sure this is something?" Did you get any sort of, you know, have you really thought about this? Any kind of anything like that, or not necessarily?
Yeah, definitely. I would say myself pushed back on myself during this time frame, because as cool as it was, and as much as I love sports cards, I wasn't sure if we would have enough content to create something for everyone in the space, because it is a very niche space. When you look at film from a theatrical place, you got to think of the masses watching it, right? And they got to be interested. So the sports card market being, call it 90-95% male driven, we're losing a big chunk there if we don't do this correctly, right? So from that perspective, I really focused on getting the script right and trying to make a documentary that didn't seem too documentary or too much about sports, even though it's all about sports cards, right? So I think you'll see that in the film audience when you watch it. The way that we laid it out, we try to make it for everyone out there, not just sports card collectors. And that was a big thing for me. When it comes to individuals in the film, like Steve Aoki's in the film, famous DJ, we just got really lucky at the time when he was really involved in the sports card market. And before you watch this film, you might not know how involved he is, but he's not just buying big cards, but he's an integral part across the board with, brand cards and his own card shop and stuff like that. But I think it took us about 6 intros to him to get him on board, because he just really doesn't do sports card interviews. So, things like that happen behind the scenes with some individuals like him.
Yeah, and you listen. Let's be, I'm not gonna. I don't want to give the film away, although I don't think you really can. You gotta see, and I want to encourage everyone to check it out. But you definitely have some move the meter folks in the film. You got Jeff Wilson, sports card investor, a guy like, I almost have them on opposite sides of the spectrum, right? You got Jeff, and then you got Vegas Dave, and all that. Right now, I just said Vegas Dave, and everyone listening to the podcast made some sort of facial expression.
Half your audience turned off the podcast, right? Half is like, all right, let me hear this.
Definitely a polarizing figure, right? Like, we talked a little bit before we went on, and he's kind of a love-hate guy. People either love him or love to hate him. That's probably the best way to say it. I'm sort of in the middle. He's not my favorite guy, truth be told. But I will say this, for what I thought I knew of him, which was a lot about him, your movie definitely brought out some of his early career as a young teenager that I didn't realize everything entails. So I have a different view of him after watching your film than I did before watching it, and I think that's a testament to you and and how it was filmed, and getting that stuff out there for people to realize, like myself, and I'm sure others will watch it and say, oh, holy smokes, I didn't realize this about this guy. Now, I still don't agree with everything he says, right? But we could say that about a lot of people. There's people listen to this show and say, John, I don't agree with everything you say, right? So, maybe his bedside manner's not someone's cup of tea, but I really felt your film sort of highlighted people's real, like people were being real. Like I said, I got to learn a little bit about Vegas Dave, of stuff I didn't know. Jeff Wilson, who's been on this show, again, people either love him or not a big fan, but they were sort of, to me, and tell me if you agree with this statement, they were sort of the yin and yang of your film. I almost felt, and the way it was even shot too, they were sort of on opposite talking points. When one would talk about, one thing, it was sort of like the other one sort of had the opposite perspective. Would you agree with that? Was it intentional? Kind of it's your film, so I'll let you. That's what I took from it.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at it from a director point of view, especially with documentaries today, I feel like there's a lot of documentaries that push you in one direction versus the other. I, as the director, wanted you to decide how you felt about the card market and give you both sides. So some individuals will say Vegas Dave should have never been in the film, but he did play an integral role, not just selling the Mike Trout card for as much as it was for modern day card, but for calling the kind of the boom and the bust of it and being so harsh on both sides. That was reality between 2017 and 2020, which is really when this was set. So we really focused on the individuals that were really moving the industry during that time frame to put in our film. So whether you loved or hated him, right, he did play a role. And you'll see that, to your point with Jeff and Vegas Dave seeming like they're on different sides, we showcase in every section of the card space the perspective of positive and the perspective of negative. And we never answer that question for you, but we want you to essentially, as a new collector that's never collected cards, to watch the film and then go online and do more research to figure out which end do you fit on, right? Do you want to get involved? Do you not want to get involved? What community should you join based on your personality, right? So we really focused on that from a director standpoint in the film. And then, there's areas like Rob Go, bought the Mickey Mantle card, right? He was in it. He's been in a lot of films in past. So he was very, cinematography driven in terms of like how he looked on film, right? But he talked about vintage. That's all he likes to collect. Whereas, Vegas Dave is like, I only collect modern cards. Vegas Dave's harsh. He'll say like, how can you're laying in the ground with dust around you, how does your cards go up when you can't play anymore, right? And so we give you both perspectives, and individuals continually fall on each side as you watch the film. So it's interesting from that point of view, for sure.
Yeah, and Rob Go, great guy. He's been on this show as well. And that's another, that's like what Vegas Dave says with vintage would be sacrilegious to Rob and to myself. I'm a vintage guy. So you're not Vegas Dave. So if this isn't, but if Vegas Dave was listening, I would tell him, sure, those guys are no longer, most of them are no longer with us. But at the same time, what they've done is in the annals of history. You can't take it back. MVPs, championship rings, their statistics in general. And what we've seen as the market has now kind of, reset a little bit and kind of come back to norm, we've seen the vintage part of the hobby has been the least affected, if you will. If you look at percentages of price coming down, and again, this changes every day, but I saw one stat that ultra modern is 40% less than during its high phase, and vintage is only down 12%. So if this was a debate, we're in politics season. If I was running against Vegas Dave, and that was one of the platforms, the long-term success of vintage, that would be something I'd point to and say, sure, these guys are not around. They're not going to get another MVP, but their track records, they're also not going to blow out their knee and their career be over in their second year. So there's points on both sides. And then when we come down, not that it's all about, this, not that it's all about dollars and pricing, but that's a big part of the hobby. It's probably been the strongest part of the hobby's been the vintage. So to kind of just poo-poo it like Vegas Dave does and sort of throw it under the bus and say it's overrated. I don't, paraphrasing.
Totally.
I'll disagree. I'm sure, as Rob did during the film, and that sort of thing. And so,
Yeah, to
yeah,
your point on that too, if you kind of look at who he collected, David Carr was the other collection outside of Mike Trout. If you fast forward in the future, we're talking about Tom Brady in 20 years. Are we even remembering Derek Carr? Probably not. So, from a vintage standpoint in career ending or prior, right? Like those individuals, and I'm not saying Tom Brady's vintage, but that's just a comparison. Another one is like Mickey Mantle has like one rookie card, right? Zion Williamson.
yeah.
So you go from Mickey Mantle having one to Tom Brady having, I think, like 300 different variations, to fast forward to Zion in 19 and 20 to having like 3,000. And then Trevor Lawrence, I heard the other day, has like 6,000 variations of his rookie card. So, how are you supposed to keep modern pricing up like vintage just from that perspective as well? So, from my end, I'm a vintage collector. I'm also a Bowman baseball collector, so I do both perspectives. But I just don't see why you would not collect a vintage player, because their names are going to be around forever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And listen, to each their own, hobby your way. We've always said that on this show. I'll never well, I am a vintage guy and I do collect modern cards too. I don't want to say I don't. I would never say, don't do modern cards in the way sort of Vegas Dave said, screw vintage, so to speak. But again, that's his opinion. He's entitled to it. So we talked about some of the folks in the film. I got to ask you, was there anyone that really declined to be in the movie? Can you share any anecdotes about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I guess the good way of putting this is there's different companies in every section of the film, right? You have graders. So we ended up doing Beckett, but we were chatting with PSA, obviously for that side. When you look at auction houses, we ended up choosing PWCC, but we looked at the larger auction houses. King Golden was even one, because he's, really selling top cards at this time as well in the marketplace. He essentially, as you guys probably aware, he's doing things, I think, with Netflix or Pawn Stars or something behind the scenes with what he's doing. So essentially, there were some individuals that couldn't sign certain paperwork that we had to have done, so that we essentially couldn't have them in our film, right? I would say the biggest star would be Logan Paul. We essentially reached out thinking we were going to do some Pokemon stuff, but we essentially ended up not doing really any Pokemon. It's mentioned a few times, but once we had Steve Aoki, that Pokemon Metazoo tie was with the TCG was already there as well. And then I would say the only other person that probably reached out that people would want to see would be Gary Vee. He was the one individual that really didn't have the time to do this at the time. And that would have been cool because we had Vegas Dave, and Vegas Dave put out that Gary Vee versus Vegas Dave in the marketplace. So it would have been cool to kind of get that perspective during that time frame of sports cards online. Everyone was saying, do you love Gary Vee, or are you team, Vegas Dave at that time? So we weren't able to get that in, but we got some really cool stuff in there that Vegas Dave does with Steve Aoki and kind of Jeff Wilson going against him in a few areas that I think the card collecting community will oversee those two individuals.
Yeah, and again, I want to say well done. It's well put together. I think you really did a great job balancing it out. The only critique, if I'm an older guy, so that's my angle. I would have liked to see maybe a little bit more on the vintage side. I know, Vegas Dave wouldn't agree with me, but that you have someone that I know personally that I thought would be. And I don't know. I can't speak for him as to whether he would have got involved or not. But we have a hobby icon in Dr. James Beckett that I would have loved to see as part of the movie. Maybe we're going to see a sequel, right? so we can make them.
I mean, we had Beckett in it. We couldn't make it happen with his schedule during the time frame. And remember, this was COVID time frame too when we filmed it. So essentially, we filmed this at every location. So we even flew to Puerto Rico to meet up with Robco, right? We do have a lot of big time old school investors, kind of from a card shop perspective as well. Joe Davis got baseball cards in Atlanta. Really good on film. But I guess from a director standpoint, I'll answer that in a way that when you think about it, this documentary is for the people, not the collectors. Because what all we want as collectors and investors is more individuals to come into the space, right? So I really wanted to create a film that allowed new collectors to not lose their way and provide them the right knowledge in the space. But also, how do you get those investors, typically younger, that we need? Because if you're an older individual, you're either already collecting or you're never going to collect, right? So individuals like Steve Aoki, Rob Go, that's been in films, Jeff Wilson, with the personality that he brings to the table, is going to grab your attention more from a younger, I think, generation. So from that perspective, I think that's the reason why we went that direction a little bit more in the film than older school collectors.
Yeah, I agree. And it's tough. Like you said, you're dealing with COVID, which was uncharted territory for us here. No one knew how long it was going to be. I mean, it's still going on. It's not like there's no more COVID, but we didn't know restriction-wise, travel-wise, there were restrictions. So,
flying in, finding a test center for our entire crew, 8 to 10 people, flying to another location, getting that done a day before. It was definitely hard because we had a lot of guidelines that pertain to how you do this in the filming industry. So yeah, it definitely was a hassle, but we made it happen for sure.
Yep. Correct me if you're wrong. Did I say the filming took court over a 6-month time frame? Is that correct?
So we spent about 6 months behind the scenes getting the team ready. And then we actually filmed this the end of April through the end of May. So actual interviewing, so we essentially flew into Florida. We filmed Nick Gonzalez. So first round pick in 2020 by the Pittsburgh Pirates. We wanted to throw in someone from the MLB that wasn't there yet to showcase how expensive cards were before they become an MLB, individual. So just showcasing prospects. And then we moved into Knoxville, Tennessee, and then Atlanta, and then back down to Florida, then Puerto Rico. Then we flew in to talk with the CEO Panini, Mark Warsop, and Jeremy Murray as well from Beckett in Dallas. And then we went up to PWCC in Oregon, and then we flew back to Vegas to film everyone else. So we did that all within a month time frame. And then it took us a good 6 to 8 months to actually edit the whole thing, right? And get this into a position where we essentially could run through festival season this year and then release it to the public, which today it goes in theaters. So we actually won 3 festival awards during the year. And essentially you have to run festivals before you release the film, or you can't win a festival award because it can't be out yet, right? So we kind of spent an 8-month period behind the scenes. And then, essentially we got to the point where, I would say within a year and a half, we were actually able to get it out, which is really fast for a theatrical film. Usually it takes 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, a feather in your cap, all this battling COVID restrictions and all that comes along with that. You sort of touched on this. You had sort of Beckett represented. There's sort of people probably watch the film and say, where's PSA? Where's SGC? Where's insert your particular favorite grader? Did you try, and then with Panini and their CEO, maybe not as much Tops. Did you try to get those folks so that it was sort of equal time, if you will?
Yeah, great question. We talked to PSA. We reached out to Tops. Tops was going through pre-acquisition kind of, territory. So essentially, I think everything's on hold when discussions like that are happening. So we weren't able to actually get them to sign off on anything, and we didn't get a high enough representative to join the film. But and we looked at it as maybe Tops, but we were like, okay, we want to get one of the big players in general for every category. But we weren't, as you watch the film, it's an hour and 36 minutes long, but in general, we try not to spend too much time in one space. Cause grading can get boring eventually, right? So if we had two big companies, it would get really boring because we'd have PSA and Beckett saying the same thing. So essentially, from a director standpoint, we really focused on, who should we really, do from that standpoint. And we felt like Beckett, with their magazines and their history, was a better play across the whole film than just the grading section, if that makes sense. So, and it just happened to help that they were in Dallas at the same place as Panini, which would have been cool if Topps was in it. But again, like, it worked out because I remember this kind of coming up, and I know that the card market changes monthly, right? It still changes monthly. It's just like, well, why wasn't Fanatics in it? Well, technically they weren't owners of licenses at the time, but we did it in a way in my film that I wanted to last for a good decade. So there's a section where we talk about the licenses and how it used to be Don Russ, Flair, Upper Deck, and who owned what. And then now where that has changed into Panini and Topps and Upper Deck with hockey. And then that kind of leaves it open for, the crowd to know that licenses change from time to time. So when they see that Fanatics owns essentially the licenses now, it won't be that weird of a documentary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you mentioned, the film length, running time, 1 hour and 36 minutes. As someone who watched the movie, I didn't feel that long. To me, like, the mark of a bad movie is one of two things, right? It feels longer than it actually is, or you find yourself like looking at the clock, like how much time has passed. Like,
yeah. Like, shouldn't this ended 2 minutes ago? That's the last thing I wanted in my film, right?
Yeah. So I speaking for myself, but I think other people obviously will enjoy this film. There was and I'm watching it late at night. Like, it was going to be one of the last things on my list to do before, going to bed and getting ready for work the next day. So, but at no point did I like look at what time it was or how long have I been watching this. I was just into the movie and knew it was over only when, the credits obviously rolled. So I think that's a mark of a very interesting movie when you're not looking, hey, how long has it been so far? What time is it? So, kudos to you there. And believe me, I was tired, but not tired enough to not continue and finish the movie. It was very, very well done, very balanced. Like you really covered a lot of the stuff across the board in a short amount of time. When you think of, 96 minutes, what again, I'm an average movie's probably about 2 hours long, right? So you did in 96 minutes, and the hobby's got so many facets to it, like you said, from grading. And one of the things I appreciate your focus on. I'm an old school guy, but I like that you talked about the last few years with the influx of new hobbyists and the flipping aspect that some people, quite frankly, don't like, but it's such an integral part of the hobby. Whether you like it or not, it's a very important part of the hobby. And I thought you did a good job covering it. And you even covered even like LCSs and how good ones are good, but you got to be careful even on that end. You got people who can weigh packs. We all know that. And that's a subject that a lot of people don't like to touch because it's sort of controversial. But I didn't feel like you really avoided anything. Can you talk about kind of your approach to some of the taboo subjects of the hobby that people know about, but don't always like broaching it?
Yeah. So to your point, there's parts of the section, because it's a documentary, right? So like, from a director standpoint, we have to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. But how do you do that in a way that educates individuals to stay away from the ugly, so that even if they see it, they understand it, they acknowledge it, but they still want to come in and collect cards? That's what my focus was. So you'll even see me, we do a kind of things behind the scenes of like bad card salesmen and flippers and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see if you spot me in part of my film's acting as well. But for instance, the flipper section, we actually got up and we had our crew out there at 5 a.m. in the morning, because, if you were collecting at this time, you knew that individuals would go sit outside like Black Friday, right? So we captured all that. Me and Paula actually went 2 or 3 weeks in a row and just stood out there to kind of get the atmosphere and understand what was going on so we could capture it, right? And it was mayhem. I actually even got there one day early enough where I was the second person in line, and I participated and ran with a guy to the card section of Walmart. And we were running so fast, when we turned a corner, he didn't realize we were turning a corner. We were kind of together, and he actually blasted like a cart full of like Walmart goods, and it fell over like a movie. It was just hilarious. So like, how do you not capture that for the excitement in a film? You know, you can't. So what happens is we show that, and then we showcase what to look out for when people return sealed, you know, products, how to examine those boxes to make sure you're not getting one of those back yourself. There's a lot going on in the marketplace online nowadays that, you know, eBay could show a card that has a lot of errors, but doesn't show it in the actual thing until you get it home. How do you get around that? How do you talk to those individuals to make sure that you're doing it correctly? And then online communities focusing on, you know, individuals like Layton Sports Card, which is very kid friendly, right? They don't cuss. They don't do certain things there. You might not love love Layton Sports Cards, but like the community is so strong, you're never going to get in a bad situation in that community. So we showcase those things right after those incidents happen so that you can kind of say, okay, this happened, but look what the good part is, right? And how do we get around that? Same with Steve Aoki. You know, we actually showcased where he bought a Patrick Mahomes fake card, right? And it's like crazy that just shows it happens to anyone. Doesn't matter what kind of collector you are, how much money, what kind of card. If you're buying a $10,000 card or you're buying a $3 card, it can happen to you. So what we do is showcase that, and then we show you the other end of like how to stay away from that so that you essentially move on feeling good about that section of the film.
Yeah, and Chris, I appreciate that you did that. I think a lot of people, even if they tackled something like this, would probably maybe not, maybe talk about some things and not other things. But I think you really covered a majority of the basis, and I think you did it, like you said, to inform people. Like, this is a great hobby, but there are some potholes that you need to avoid, and here's what to look for. You did a good job, like you said. You did your Stan Lee, where Stan Lee's in all his movies in some form. I saw you. It's funny. I saw you, and that's what I thought. I think I even wrote it down, like Stan Lee appearance by Chris, which is real cool.
I told myself I would do Stan Lee if I did a film. So
yeah. So listen, if I'm doing a movie, I'm never going to do. But if I'm doing my own movie, it'd be hard not to put myself in there, even in a small role or whatever. So I get it, man. That was cool, and I think your wife appeared, was in it too, and and you did a great job. Again, going back to that, you did a great job showing some of the pitfalls. You gotta be careful here. It's a great hobby. It's the best hobby in the world, but just be wary that this stuff does go on. And here's how to not kind of fall into that trap. And I think you did a good job.
And I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you think that way, because I think the audience, when you guys go out and see this in theaters today or after it comes out online on demand or platform, I think you guys will feel the same way, because a lot of times if you push that too hard, all of a sudden it's a hit piece on the market, right? And no one wants a hit piece, especially if you're a collector. So I didn't want this to come out and think it was another documentary that just shredded an industry. So, but at the same time, it's like you have to showcase some of these things, right? So I'm glad to hear that you thought that way, and I think collectors are going to feel that way. But those things bring enough excitement for individuals to watch the whole film that aren't in the card space to hopefully come in and collect, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was going for, Chris. You covered it, but you didn't over cover it. You just you said what needed to be said without overdoing it. Like you said, become sort of a hit piece or a smear piece, if you will. Not even close to that. I don't think anyone will watch that and would take that sentiment away. As a matter of fact, I watched it and I just wrote down, covered, some topics that other people probably wouldn't, but did it in the right way and didn't overkill it. So exactly what you said. I got to ask you, doing this movie, you're in the hobby. Has the movie itself, even though it's your movie, has it changed how you thought or how you approached the hobby once you got into doing this movie?
You're the first person to ask me that, and that's a great question, actually. So, from my perspective, after the movie, I stopped buying base cards and like essentially looking at flipping those into either graded cards or just flipping them in the future for, if I bought them for 10, 15 bucks, thinking they were going to $100. I did see how every individual that's more integral and spending millions of dollars in the space, what is their mindset of how the space is trending, and really focused on, okay, coming out of this as a better investor myself, right? Because if you think about it, I invested like a lot of individuals when I was young. During quarantine, I got back into it. So this was a year into me collecting. So I was still making mistakes myself. So it actually helped fuel me into a better investor, where now I'm focusing primarily actually on orange out of 20 or less cards. Sometimes I'll go after gold with 50. I'm a big Bowman collector. So really understanding when to let your favorite minor leaguers go in terms of card sales versus hanging on too long, who to target, stuff like that. Behind the scenes, individuals really made me understand that. Plus, I bought a lot of 1968 Topps cards. It's a great set from a vintage perspective. A lot of great players. I'm trying to go for the rainbow with PSA grading on the Mickey Mantle there. So from individuals like me that I was in my mid 30s, so call me the lower end of age group of collectors, I started becoming more vintage than ever leaving this film as well.
Yeah, well said, and I appreciate your candidness saying, "Hey, it has changed me in this regard." I think anytime you do anything and you get that deep into it, whether it's a movie or something else, I think it has to change how you're thinking in some capacity, even in the slightest. So I appreciate you, you being honest there. I know the movie is just coming out today, but I gotta ask you, like, you shot this movie during one time of the hobby when it was crescendo, and now we're sort of different thing. And I mean, are you already thinking of whether it's a part two or it's called
Yeah.
a new title? Are you thinking of getting back into foray and doing another movie, whether it's next year or whatever the timetable? Have you let your mind go there?
Yeah, there's so many startups in this space popping up. Like for instance, we had HGA, which is arguably probably the fastest growing startup during the time frame that we were filming, which has essentially became a PC collector, or people are staying away from it now, right? And now you're looking at, Derek Jeter started his own grading company with storing cards. So it's been amazing to have Derek Jeter start up in him in the film, right? So to your point, there's a lot going on in the space that allows us to potentially ride into 2.0. I think we need to see how this film goes, and I think we need to see where the card market goes over the next year still, to see if it's really going to continue to track downward or if we're going to stabilize and move up. Because at this point, I think we captured the mayhem of the 17 to 20, and we're just seeing the shakeout now. So I don't know how much of that side of the business we can do without duplicating what we've already done in the first film. I would say that it would be better off in a docu-series format moving forward, having more individuals in that are more vintage and collectors that have been around a long time versus trying to hit those individuals that are going to be best on the big screen. So it's still kind of up in the air, I guess, from that point. And I mean, Adam Sandler is going to do a movie, supposedly, a card movie. So if that comes out a year from now, it's going to be hard to beat that one, right? So I'm glad we got out before he did for our theatrical release of this first one.
Yeah, it's funny. I had talked about that on this show. I'm hoping it's just not like uncut gems with sports cards instead of,
It's got to
gems.
be though, right? It's got to
Yeah,
be.
I hope they do a little more with it than that. Like, not that there was anything that was actually, from an actor, a performance piece. It was different seeing Adam Sandler not be really just kind of a funny guy. There was some funny moments, but it wasn't a comedy, obviously. So I thought he did a great job. I'd like to see it a little bit more in depth. I hope, obviously, that's going to be a fictional movie, but at the same time, Chris, where you did your research and got your stuff all accurate, I hope they reach out to whoever it might be, to get, so there's a realistic quality uh, to that film. In other words, where
Yeah.
we're not watching it and laughing like that's not how what happens in the, one of those deal like that's blown.
You
That's
watch my
bad.
documentary first, and then you watch that, so you know what's reality or not in the film, right? And films have to be that way sometimes, especially when it's not a documentary, right? So that's a good point, though, that I always like to bring up with my documentary. I want you to remember HGA. Tyler Hitt was the owner of HGA at the time. We have no affiliation with anyone in our film. That's what's cool about documentary. We have no ties to companies, no individuals. But things come out after the fact. Some things happen with companies, or Vegas Dave you don't like. But at the end of the day, these individuals played a huge role during 2017 to 2020, right? And that's when it was set. So I want you guys to know that, have an open mind and understand that whether you like someone or don't, for whatever reason, remember they played an integral part of that time frame, and we need to show that to the world. So you're gonna see that when those characters come out, and you're going to either love or hate those individuals. But I think by the end of the film, you'll understand why they're in there.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's been, years ago that we had Mr. Mint, Alan Rosen, that was that character in the hobby. And there's been other people along the way that you may not like everything they do, but to say they're not important or they're not contributing in some fashion or other would be disingenuous. So I agree with you, 100%. You're People are going to watch this movie, and it's so well done that they're going to think it was easy to do it. Hey, you just turn on the camera, ask some questions of people, film some other stuff in action. Obviously, it's not like that. Was there any point in the process where you're like, what did I get myself into? Not so much doubt, but like this became like a real endeavor. Like everyone has a plan. Like Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan till you're punched in the face. Did you have moments where you're like, am I gonna like, can I do this? Or this is not as simple as I thought it might have been.
Yeah, I actually think it was the opposite for this film, which is rare for being a first film. There was parts where we found our producer very quickly. Like we interviewed 10 producers. We found one. We were like, wow, this guy's great. This is meant to be. And then we had him show up with us one day for the flipper side. We did that very early. We're like, let's test this guy. And we sat back and watched our flipping at the Target scene and what we did with that. And we were like, wow, this film was meant to be. So throughout this filming down the road, little things happened. We were like, this was meant to be. This film was just meant to be. That's how it felt from my perspective. But there was times of very scary times for me because it was COVID time. I have another company. I have an HR tech business, and I was hiring individuals at the time for that. And I was meeting individuals in person in Vegas. And luckily I met them outside. And one individual actually got COVID, literally came and interviewed me. And the next day texted me she had COVID. And we were literally flying out 2 days later to start filming. And I was like, there's no way that's half of our filming time. And I'm the director. I have to be there. What's going to happen? Is Rob Go going to be available? Is Steve Aoki going to be available if we have to push this? Because we literally had all of our cast lined up over a 3-week period and we couldn't really change. So little things like that happen. You're like, oh man, I just lit all my cash on fire, as an investor at that point. Right. But things just kept happening as we moved on. And like, for instance, we were able to find Nick Gonzalez's Rainbow from a Bowman perspective. A guy actually had a lot of his cards that got him signed. And then we were able to grade that. We also, at Leighton Sports Cards, we had them open up a box for us of Contenders Optic. We actually hit a silver Tua autograph, and we actually did them first. So we actually were able to grade that Tua card. We actually were showing with Joe Davis and Jeff how to look at whether this card should be graded or not, what it's going to be. Then we sent it to Beckett, and then we showed it going through PWCC's robots. So like, we would have never been able to do that if we didn't hit a big card there. So like, little things kept happening, and we're like, okay, this is just making too much sense that we're going to have a really good movie.
It was almost like there was a little Disney behind the film.
Yes. And I was just ripping all kinds of good boxes on the road, having a good old time. I'm at Leighton Sports Card, and Rich is we're there way too long. We're probably there 8 hours, I would say, this day, and we're supposed to interview him for an hour. But he has such a large collection of cards, of $1 million cards, $500,000 cards. You know, he has a signed rookie Tom Brady, you know, rookie card. Like, you name it, he's got it. He's got a really cool clear Mike Trout baseball bat, and he had to get going somewhere. And I'm like, oh, just, you know, we got 5 more cards. We'll pack up here. And pretty much I was just like, just leave all your $1 million cards out and we'll take care of it. And, you know, I was just so involved with like being shocked about how great these cards were in my hand that I was just like a little kid in a candy store at a lot of these places as well.
Yep. You mentioned a word. It's a hot button word in the hobby. Not with me. You know, you mentioned the word investment, right? There are people that's like a real bad word. Like, cards are not an investment. But I'm one of those. You don't have to win the argument with me, because for what some of these cards go for, you can't really say they're not an investment. So just, you know, between being in the hobby already, doing this movie, like, to the people that say, you know, my argument, my answer, Chris, is like, it may not be investment to you or even me for the most part, but to say it's not is not really accurate, right? I believe anything can be an investment. Time is an investment. You don't go to work and say, don't pay me, right? You want to be paid for your time. You're investing your time. So you mentioned, and I know some people are going to cringe, not me, but like, kind of explain your, you know, your take on the investment side of the hobby, if you will.
Yeah, and I'll take this from the director approach first with the film itself.
Okay.
So this is for the people, not for the individuals that are doing this right now, right? And what I mean by that is, we don't want new collectors to lose their way. And how do new collectors lose their way? They expect an investment when they purchase their first thing to grow, right? So I'm not big on the investor side from that perspective, especially in the film. We showed the difference between investing and long-term growth and stuff like that to get people to want to join this from that perspective. But I really want them to become collectors. The last thing we need is for someone to come in and buy a $1,500 box of basketball and get $40 worth of, and then leave and never come back in space and like, I lost my investment. It's like, no, I want you to come in and say, I'm going to collect Brandon Clark of the Grizzlies, even though he's 6th string, because I know him growing up, and I just want to collect his cards, right? And PC him. And then once I get into understanding how PCing works, and maybe then I want to move into, hey, I understand the card collecting enough to go buy some Tom Brady's or some LeBron Jameses to essentially become an investor. I need individuals to start with collecting first, because the last thing we want is individuals to come in and leave. We want them to be in 10, 20, 30 years alive, right? That's the goal, is for us all to be collectors. From a collector mindset, from my perspective, this is a guy on a piece of cardboard that if it gets wet, it disintegrates. This should be worth $0 in reality, right? As long as you think that, you are a collector, and you'll never care whether your cards go up, whether they go down, as Stevie Aoki says in the film. But you do this because you want to collect, you love it, and it's not about the dollars, right? So from a director standpoint, it was really tough for me to fuel those two together, because you need both sides to get enough interest for someone that doesn't collect today, that's older than a kid, to come in and collect a guy on a piece of cardboard, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And yeah, that's it, right? You know, if you don't like the investing aspect, like you said, just collect what you love, what you appreciate. And if you are, you know, you are. Whatever, you know, you can invest in anything. We have a guy in Syracuse who's a multi-millionaire many times over from investing in garbage and recycling. So that's literally trash that he's made. He never has to work again if he doesn't want to. So I like I always say, anything can, if that's your approach, anything, it's all in the approach, right? And
like,
so,
for me, I'm a big Bowman baseball box player, right?
Yeah.
I know now, opening enough Bowman boxes, what I can pay for a box, what I can realistically get out, put on eBay and sell. And I sell 6 figures on eBay now. So I have a pretty good kind of operation going on that end. But I do that because I love opening Bowman. So I figured out how to sell that appropriately to make my money back, so I can just rip rip wax, right? Without losing
Yeah.
money, because it's ripping wax of Bowman's more exciting to me than selling and making money for my cards later. So I figured out how to make my money back to allow me to rip what I want to rip and enjoy my afternoons at home, you know, with myself or with friends that come over, or my wife, whenever I can get her to sit with me to open a pack of cards or not, right? So you just got to look at it that way and then build up from there, you know, and build your investment as you go along. But if you do what you love first, then you're going to really enjoy the space.
Yep. Can't say it any better than that. Chris, thank you for giving some time, giving us a little behind the scenes of behind the card and what went into that movie. Well done, like I said, and coming out today. So I always give the guests the final word. Take your time, where people can go see the film, check out what you're doing, maybe what's coming down the pike. Give out all those socials, websites, all that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So you can see behind me, it's at Who's Behind the Card. That's our Instagram. We are behind the card on Facebook, but Instagram is where we push everything that ends up going to Facebook. So check us out for behind the scenes content on our Instagram. We're in theaters today, so it's going to be in all large markets. So go out and check out the film in person on the big screen. You'll really enjoy that. If not, look for it on in demand and on demand afterwards quickly. And John, I just appreciate what you guys are doing with Sports Card Nation. You know, thanks for having me on. Keep doing what you guys are doing in the card community. Again, at the end of the day, my film, even though it made theaters, and that's great for me personally, from an accomplishment standpoint, I just want you as an audience to go out there and become a bigger card collector, right, at the end of the day. So as long as we can spread the word, get individuals to see it that aren't in the card market, our collecting community will continue to grow bigger. And it will become that, you know, collector's mentality that it used to be pre this era that I filmed. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Yeah, that's called being an ambassador and an advocate for the hobby. And we appreciate that as well. Thanks, Chris, and continued success.
Thanks a lot, John.